Okay, so up to now in our project, we have added an entity data model. We essentially went through that wizard that asked us which database did we want to use and what tables that we wanted to add to the model. Created that visual model for us, but we also looked at all of the boilerplate code that was generated for us using the Entity Framework API that allowed us to work with the database as if it were any other API, any other set of classes and properties and methods. And so we use that, first of all, to get a context object, which would give us a handle onto a database connection. And then second, we used it to grab back all of the customer records as a list of customers that we then iterated through and just displayed names. We only had one record in the database, but it sufficed. It demonstrated how all that worked. So we were good to go there. Now what I want to do is just demonstrate how to use a server control in ASP.NET that will automatically format a grid-like view of the table data we're retrieving from our Acme database and Entity Framework. So we're going to use this GridView control in ASP.NET to accomplish that. And it has a feature called data binding, and essentially data binding is just baked in logic to certain server controls in ASP.NET that allows you to give it a data source, in this case a collection of customers, customer objects, and it will it has the logic to work with that collection, retrieve the records, format each individual record as a row in a table, and then display that to the end user. So that's the notion of data binding. You give it a data source and you say go off and bind to this source, to this collection of records, and then it has the logic to iterate through each record and display it to the end user. So so what we're going to do is use that control to display, and it's very simple to do, but we want to also talk about some of the ramifications of this. So currently I'm working with the local DB example. You'll probably want to grab what I have so far. So take a look at the CSASP 061 folder, grab the before local DB example and copy that into your projects directory. Open it up and you'll be where I'm at right now. I don't think we're going to need this label control, but I'm going to go ahead and just make some space for myself using the arrow keys on my keyboard and the enter key to make some visual space. In the toolbox off to the left hand side, what I'm going to do is scroll down till I get to this data section, and notice I'm expanding the data section, and here we have a series of data based controls, and they really fall into two categories. You have what are called data source controls, which are non-visual controls that ask the question, where do I get the data? And then there are data bound controls that say, how do I connect to a database, retrieve it, and display that data? So as you'll see in the next video, I'm going to demonstrate a tools-driven approach to do exactly what we're doing right now with C#. The list, or the SQL data source, and there are others like the link data source, entity data source, object data source. These again are non-visual elements that you can add to a web page so that you can drag and drop your way to success. You drag these items, you configure a few properties in a wizard, and then you don't have to write any code in order to get this to work. Now I'm going to explain why it might be great for tiny projects, but for most applications you're going to build, this won't be sufficient. But I do want you to know the technique, and we'll talk about the difference. It'll give us a good opportunity to talk about why there are two tracks in our curriculum on LearnVisualStudio.net. All in good time. For now, let's do this. We're going to go to the GridView control. I'm going to drag it and drop it here onto my form. I'm also going to change the name of this grid view just like I would any other control. I'm going to go to the bottom here. Well, actually, let me go to the miscellaneous section here, and we're just going to call this Customers Grid View, like so. And we're not going to make any other changes to it. Let's go now to our default.aspx.cs. And the first thing I'm going to do is comment out some of this code that no longer really applies in our situation. So I'm going to get rid of this looping structure. All right, so I still am creating a context object and retrieving all of the records. What I'll need to do in order to set up the grid view control so that it can display all of the customer records is simply this. So I'm going to go customers grid view dot data source equals, And what I should be able to do here at this point is just point to our customers collection, like so. Now, this is actually, if you hover over it, this is a DbSet of customer. It is not the same as a list of customer. And you'll see how that's manifested in a moment. This line of code on line 27 will not work. It's a simple fix, but I want to demonstrate the error that you will see if you forget to do this. And then finally, after we've set the data source, we're going to go customer GridView dot data bind. There we go. And we're going to call the data bind method. So you have the source, go off and bind to it. We're telling the GridView. So that's all that we should need to do. Now the first time we run it, obviously we're going to hit this little error. And it basically says on line 28 that it's a not supported exception, and you can see additional information. Data binding directly to a store query, DbSet, DbQuery, DbSQL query, so on, is not supported. Instead, populate the DbSet, a DbSet with data, for example, calling load on the DbSet, and then bind to local data. So essentially, there's a couple of different ways to fix this. I'm going to show you the quick and easy way to do this using a helper method on all DbSets that you'll ever encounter. Whoops. So we want to do a to list like so. What this will do is force the entity framework now to actually perform the query and return results and then convert it to a list of customer. As I said before, just doing this will not actually retrieve data from the database. Entity framework works in such a way that it will wait to the last possible moment and then it will execute the query whenever you're actually attempting to work with the data. So we'll talk about why that is much later in a whole other series. I just want to explain the behavior for now. Alright, so now that we've fixed that line of code in 27, let's go ahead and run it again. This time, you can see with almost no effort, 2 lines of code and dragging and dropping a grid view onto our design surface, we were able to accomplish this. Now, the next step for us would be to actually start separating out some of our logic into layers. So, for example, we would take this code essentially and put it in a different assembly. We could leave it in the same project if we wanted to. This goes back to what we talked about separation concern a little bit ago, a couple of lessons ago. And we could just separate it into classes and just folder structures and things of that nature in Visual Studio in a single project. But I found, and many people find, that in order to enforce that layering of your software, you should create separate projects for each layer within your solution. So we will do that after the next lesson, where we're going to show a tools-driven approach to getting the same results, and I'm going to talk about the difference between a tools-driven architecture and a maintenance-driven architecture. All right, so let's do that in the very next lesson. We'll see you there. Thank you.